remarks on Dr. Pandya's book. Mr. T.S. Tirumurti was in the Indian Foreign Service with a diplomatic career spanning 37 years between 1985 to 2022. He served as Ambassador, Permanent Representative of India to the United Nations in New York between 2020 to 2022. He was also the President of the UN Security Council for August 2021. Earlier, he was Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. Sir, we would request you to please limit your speech from 10 to 20 minutes at max. Thank you, sir.
Annual Dialogue 2024. It's indeed a great privilege to speak on the occasion of the release of the book, Terror Financing in Kashmir. Allow me at the outset to convey my heartiest felicitations to Dr. Abhinav Pandya. The book promises to be a pioneering one, covering the entire gamut of the ecosystem of terror in Jammu and Kashmir, especially the modalities, its dynamics, the sponsors, the economics of proxy wars, and the financing and legitimization of terror from across our border by Pakistan. I also felicitate the publisher, Routledge. For our 2-year term in the UN Security Council between 2021 and 22, one of the priority areas we had identified was combating terrorism. I had also chaired the UN Security Council Counter-Terrorism Committee for 2022. It was therefore with great interest that I read the book and was genuinely startled by some of the facts and data and conclusions. Here we have a deeply researched book which has been tested on the touchstone of ground reality, covering uncharted and new domains of all facets of the problem of terror, especially, of course, terror financing in Jammu and Kashmir. As the author himself says, Kashmir's terror ecosystem is rooted in the complex, layered, and the interconnected web of Islamism, separatism, radicalization, and terrorism. And I want to underline here that the author had done all this in the face of tremendous danger to his own life. He told me how he dodged grenades and bullets. And that's why we need to laud his efforts and take this book very seriously. He does not pull any punches and gives a candid view of the ecosystem which helps terror to thrive in the valley. His narration of his personal interactions are really fascinating. The author has rightly expanded the definition of terror financing. He has included a range of activities which it encompasses, including, for example, the sustaining the separatist narrative, the larger ecosystem of terrorism and terror financing, funding of activities like stone pelting and anti-India media narratives, radicalization, digital manipulation, and disinformation campaigns, etc. The broader perspective which he has given is very crucial in helping us appreciate the dynamics of terror financing. The book goes in depth into the history of terror financing, how it started and how it expanded in the region and later got intricately interlinked with international terror financing. These include, inter alia, fake currency printed in Pakistan, FICN, financing through international donations and from drugs and hawala channels, the role of jihadist diaspora organizations and charities in terror funding, role of petrodollars, and undermining of the economy itself. I was particularly struck by how the author had managed to connect the dots from the local to the regional to the national to the global. These chapters are bound to give much food for thought to our investigation and intelligence agencies and they present a very disturbing picture. What should disturb us even more is his investigation into the role played by some of the mainstream institutions of the state. It is indeed revealing the extent to which the mainstream institutions have been compromised and penetrated by Pakistani proxies. As the author points out, Pakistan transformed terror funding business into a robust parallel conflict economy, with the conflict elites having substantial stakes in it. Friends, the book has also given a detailed account of the three main Pakistani-based terrorist groups, Hizb ul-Mujahideen, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and Jaish-e-Mohammed. In this context, you will recall that in the UN Security Council, India proposed several names of terrorists in 2022 for listing under the Security Council Resolution 1267 sanctions regime. In a significant development, the United States joined us as co-signatories for these proposals. However, a block was placed by China against listing them. But in January 2023, the listing of Abdurrahman Makki, Deputy Amir and Chief of Lashkar-e-Taiba, was approved. The first listing with India as a proposer in the Council. What is even more significant is that this was also the first terrorist to be expressly named for terrorist acts in Jammu and Kashmir in a Security Council listing under 1267. It has taken the Security Council decades to expressly name a Pakistani terrorist as committing terror in Kashmir. Incidentally, the other proposals we made are still stuck. I should add here that even proposals for proscribing terrorists have been given a religious color by Pakistan. Pakistan desperately tried repeatedly to have Hindus listed under 1267 sanctions regime on cooked up charges, which was repeatedly rejected by the Security Council. During our stint in the Security Council, where we held its presidency in August 2021 and again in December 2022, we consistently fought against justifying terrorism, against double standards, against fragmenting our fight, against linkages to organized crime, against financing for terrorism, and against those who blocked enlisting of terrorists under the UN sanctions regime. You can see from this book how many of these factors come into play in Kashmir. At this juncture, even as we focus on terror and its financing in Kashmir, it is important to keep in mind four broad, dangerous, contemporary international trends which are diluting our collective fight against terror, which include the fragmentation of our collective fight due to ideology, narrow geographical focus, use of new and emerging technology for terrorist purposes, and finally, contemporary forms of religiophobia. Friends, 11 September 2001, and which you call 9/11, was a defining moment in the fight against terrorism. Before 9/11, the world was divided into your terrorists and my terrorists. Since terrorism in some part of the world didn't cause the same degree of concern to the others. But 9/11 proved that nobody was immune to terror, irrespective of the region where it occurred. So it soon became our terrorists. It became a collective fight with the UN Security Council passing a binding resolution number 1373 in September 2001. However, at the global level, after 20 years of this resolution, we are in the danger of drifting back to the era of your terrorists and my terrorists and fragment our collective fight. The UN Global Terrorism Index 2023 states clearly that ideologically motivated terrorism continues to be the most common type of terrorism in the West, and that all of them can be attributed to far-right terrorism, especially in Europe. As far as the United States is concerned, they indicate that what they are currently dealing with is racially, ethnically motivated violent extremism. They call it REMV, and the related terrorist attacks. China is also focused on what they perceive as terrorist threats to them. Their blocking of India's attempts to list terrorists under 1267 sanctions list is an example of how geopolitics can override the global fight on terror. Another example of this fragmentation is Canada. They have told us that our terrorists, which are the Canadian Khalistani terrorists on their soil, are not their terrorists. So the fight against terror is indeed getting fragmented. This book should serve to put terrorism from Pakistan and its proxies back on the international agenda. The second contemporary trend, geographically speaking, is that of Africa, which has been the region where the virulence and intensity of terrorism has been increasing exponentially. The Global Terrorism Index of 2023 points out that the Sahel region in sub-Saharan Africa is now what it calls the epicenter of terrorism, with the Sahel accounting for more terrorism deaths in 2022 than any other region. In fact, geopolitics of Africa and their own governments are being changed in the face of their inability to fight terror. This GTI Index 2023 also indicates that South Asia remains the region with the worst average GTI score for 2022. So the rest of the world being too preoccupied with their own variety of terror, the focus is shifting away from South Asia and also from Africa. Friends, the third contemporary global trend relates to new and emerging technologies for terrorist purposes. India brought the UN Security Council counter-terrorism meeting to India in October 2022, and the landmark Delhi Declaration on countering the use of new and emerging technologies for terrorist purposes focused on three key areas, namely 1, countering terrorist exploitation of information and communication technologies, 2, threats posed by terrorist use of unmanned aerial systems like drones, 3, countering financing of terrorism, especially new payment technologies and funding methods. As you can see, we have entered into a far more sophisticated and dangerous era of terrorism. The fourth contemporary trend relates to the attempt to politicize the phobias against religions to justify terror. The UN and the rest of the world have traditionally condemned phobias against the three Abrahamic religions, namely anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and Christianophobia, and rightly so. The first worrying trend is using Islamophobia as an excuse or justification to condone terror. But in fact, in para 3 of the UN Resolution 2004, it says that terrorism is under no circumstances justifiable by consideration of a religious nature. But in the last two texts of the Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy of 2021 and later in 2023, which was adopted by the UN General Assembly, Pakistan tried its best to introduce reference to Islamophobia as a justification for terror acts. India fought to keep this reference out. Only last week, Pakistan tabled a resolution to appoint a special envoy for countering Islamophobia. 44 countries, including India, abstained, though the United States, China, and Russia voted for the resolution. The UN is now being divided on religious lines in front of us. The second worrying aspect is this fight against religiophobia, and this fight is selective. There has been a lack of recognition of the growing attacks and hatred against non-Abrahamic religions, including against Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, etc. The continuing attacks on temples and gurudwaras and forcible conversion of minority communities in our neighborhood are well known. But this hatred has spread to the West as well, including to the United States, Australia, the United Kingdom, and to Canada. Questions are being raised in the West whether secularism cum political civil rights construct is adequate to combat religious motivations, or has it become important to combat religious phobia? This has serious implications for a multicultural, pluralistic, and democratic country like India. So friends, even as we combat terror financing from across our borders, I thought it is important to link this up and some of the contemporary trends happening globally with the central finding of this book. And these trends are only going to get worse as we get increasingly polarized on geopolitical lines. I once again felicitate Dr. Abhinav Pandya for this really unique book, and I'm convinced that this will serve as a crucial input into decision making by our policymakers. Thank you.